So welcome everyone, and thanks for being here. My name's Campbell Ingram. I'm the Executive Officer of the Delta Conservancy. And it's really great to see you all here and see the level of interest in the Delta Drought Response Pilot Program. So we really appreciate you taking your time to be here. And we're very excited to share with you the results of the program and then get your feedback on the program through the course of the morning. So I'm going to do a little housekeeping, review the agenda, and then we'll get started. So first and main thing is that the restrooms, the women's restroom is right there. The men's restroom is right here on the just behind the big silver thing. And then there's a couple more restrooms outside around the corner of the building right out there because there need more restrooms. I think we should have brought over the wedding arch for special. So I want to start with some gratitude. First, I want to thank the Ryde Hotel for generously donating the facility. I mean, the Ryde is a really great venue, and it's so much better to have these type meetings here in the Delta as opposed to in a conference room up in Sacramento. So we really appreciate their generous donation, and they've got food, great food. There's a frittata over there that's just phenomenal. So please avail yourself of those resources and enjoy. Definitely want to thank the Department of Water Resources who funded this program over the course of 2 years to the tune of $20 million. And as you can imagine, it's a pretty Herculean effort to put together a program of this nature. So I want to thank the staff of the Delta Conservancy and the staff of the Delta Water Master who really did the heavy lifting of designing the programs, doing the solicitation, reviewing the applications, managing the grants. Just a tremendous amount of work, putting together the final report, and then creating this event for all of us to share today. So really a tremendous amount of work. Thank you. Probably should have started, but thank you so much to the farmers who participated in the program. I mean, it was, I meant to do that first, I really did. But it was honestly, for us, it was such a great experience. It was one of the first times that we really had a reason to really engage with Delta agriculture. It was a great partnership. We learned a lot, and I think we provided some value and some information to the Delta agricultural community. So it was that was a great partnership. I also want to thank, there was an oversight committee, and I'll talk a little bit more about who they were and what they did, as well as a selection committee, all people that really dedicated quite a bit of time to make sure the program ran and ran very well. So we appreciate all of their participation as well. So it's always good to start out with gratitude. It really was a big effort and just a sincere gratitude for everyone who participated. So let's see, moving on. We're going to give a welcome. Here we are. We're going to give a little bit of program background and overview. Jay and I will do that. And then we're going to do kind of go over the analysis and the outcomes of the program. There'll be some time after that to do facilitated discussion. So that's where we really want to hear from you all, your thoughts and responses to the program and the results. Then the Nature Conservancy is going to talk about the bird benefit outcomes, a major part of the program that we did this year. And then UC Davis will talk about the study itself and the updates on the ongoing efforts on 6 of the projects. And then we'll have a little bit more facilitated discussion, and then we'll wrap up and have you out of here by noon today. So that's that. And so it is a forum, and so we want to be respectful. These are just sort of standard guidelines, but we're hoping everybody can expect and accept that the work is ongoing. I mean, this is not finalized. It's still kind of a moving target. Exercise some sympathy, stay engaged and participate to your fullest ability. Be attentive to how much space you're occupying. Speak from your own experience. Listen with an open mind. Honor the opinions expressed by others. Expect and accept disagreement. That's a good one. Do not be afraid to respectfully challenge others' ideas, but refrain from any personal comments. Be conscious of body language and nonverbal communication, and be mindful of your own cultural beliefs and norms, and do not assume they are universally shared. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay, who's going to talk a little bit more about how the program came about.
Great, thanks, Campbell. It's really great to be with all of you here today. I think Campbell really captured it, that the direct program was a really important experiment. I think we can all agree that we're exceptionally grateful for the last 2 water years, that we've had a chance to sort of take a deep breath and we've got the water we need and to kind of address both the needs for nature in the system as well as the needs for agriculture and people. And so I want to turn back a bit, though, to a different moment in time. And the nature, I will, in full disclosure, I want to thank the team at the Office of the Delta Watermaster. So my predecessor, Michael George, initially Lisa Crowley, and then Lindsay Kameyer for their work in really running the technical side of this operation. And I'm really in debt to them for their continued engagement and advocacy in this work. And the truth is, in my life, when this started, I was an advocate from the Nature Conservancy to fund ecosystem services in times of drought. And I know the Conservancy will give you more on this, but in truth, it's not just rivers that dry up, but wetland habitat for migratory birds especially. And as bird populations get more consolidated in fewer wetland areas, avian influenza and other diseases break out, and we lose, we just have massive declines in populations of migratory birds. And so that is particularly important. So now I want to flash back to a not particularly welcome moment in time as the drought is getting more severe in 2015 and 2016. There are curtailments in the Sacramento system and throughout the state. And my predecessor had a lot of pressure coming at him from all sides. What's the Delta going to do in response to this? What's the Delta going to do? I don't want to make this a discussion about water rights, but in fact, there was a lot of tension around that because there's a lot of feeling that the Delta has the most senior rights in the system. We're not going to talk about that today, but we are going to talk about a real earnest effort on the part of people in this room to come around the table and say, well, hey, what can we do? We recognize that the whole state is in stress. My predecessors started in 2015-16 a voluntary drought response program in the Delta by which a number of diverters reduced their pumping by 25%. Now, we have anecdotal analyses from that there was a lot of good faith participation in that effort. The metrics for measuring how much water we were able to keep in channel, that's a gray area, but we've gotten better at that because the confluence of timing was that at the same SB 88 passes in 2014, and then everybody gets serious about water data reporting. And by strict definition in the bill, it talks about measuring diversions. That doesn't work very effectively in the Delta. That's another conversation we can have. But we moved to a methodology with the Delta Measurement Experimental Consortium that Michael George started in 2017, which continues to move forward in truing up how we actually measure consumptive use in the Delta, because that's what we all really want to understand in terms of keeping a balance in the Delta. And so we need to get better at really understanding those real-time dynamics. I am extraordinarily pleased that we've placed this bet on OpenET because this technology is exploding. We can all learn from it and also layer on additional programming into that architecture. And I'm just excited that the work that we have not just produced so far in setting up the deltaacp.com OpenET-based reporting platform, but additionally looking beyond that at the pace and scale of temporal and spatial resolution of the data that is just extraordinary, and I think takes us a long way to getting to a unified view of consumptive use in real time in the Delta. Let's see, I think that's where I'm going to be. So I've talked a little bit about this in kind of getting ahead of myself. So, I just want to close in noting that we've stood up this platform. We've got extraordinary response from Delta farmers. I want to thank especially the North Delta, South and Central Delta water agencies. The Central and South Delta water agencies really provided a lot of the intellectual capital as well as the funding to get OpenET up and running. I want to also indicate now that we're working very closely to integrate the OpenET methodology in the modernization of the ERIM system for water data reporting. And so we actually have a common dashboard by which we can all sort of open the hood and see how much water we're really using, and again, getting closer to real-time understanding in the Delta. So I am really excited about what we've learned from the DRIP program. I'm candidly, as I've said to a couple of you that have participated in the program, I'm more interested in hearing from you than talking, and I want to kind of yield my time back to just say thank you for coming, thank you for participating in this program, and we look forward to continuing engagement with you to just better understand water use, consumptive use, and the intersection of flow dynamics in the Delta and the exercise of water rights. So thank you all for this conversation today, and just glad to be a part of it.
All right, so I'm just going to say a few words about how the Delta Conservancy came in and the role that we played. So the Delta Conservancy is a granting entity. We typically take funding and do ecosystem restoration, economic development, climate action, and even now drought response. And after the Office of the Water Master and DWR worked together with the water agency into the Delta and sort of roughed out the rough plan for the program, they asked us to actually try to run the grant program to provide grants to incentivize the activities. So we were very happy to be able to do that and set about doing that in 2022 with a grant from DWR of about $9 million to run the program the first year. The drought continued into 2023, and we continued to run the grant program in 2023. Obviously, water conditions change, and we'll talk a lot about that throughout the program. But we put together a planning committee, and that planning committee included DWR, the Nature Conservancy, ourselves, the Office of Delta Water Master, and really just set about designing the program and figuring out how we're going to run the grant program. Today, obviously, we're going to talk about the 2023 program results. We'll talk a little bit about the previous year's results, and then I want to make it clear that because water conditions are really quite good right now, we don't anticipate running the program again in 2024. So the objectives of the program are here. Overall, the goal was to try to reduce consumptive use to improve environmental conditions in the Delta, and just demonstrate that we could work together to be able to manage drought in the Delta, and work collaboratively and incentivize farmers to do practices that we were hopeful would save a lot of water. So the planning committee got together and then, of course, started thinking more about the nuts and bolts. And we developed a selection committee, and I wanted to recognize the members of the selection committee. So it included DWR, California Department of Food and Agriculture, UC Merced, UC Cooperative Extension, the Office of Delta Water Master, and the Nature Conservancy, and of course the Delta Conservancy. They came together and through the course of the program evaluated, this is just for the 23 year program, but 109 qualified bids that came in, and then awarded 61 individual grants to 33 grantees for this year. But the prior year there were about 30 grants in that program as well. And then administered those grants throughout the course of the last 2 years. So then there was also the Oversight Committee, and wanted to recognize that included, again, DWR, the Office of the Delta Water Master, State Water Resource Control Board, and University of California, including Cooperative Extension and UC Merced and UC Davis. And they were really instrumental in making sure that the analysis was taking place and then helping to bring all that information together to produce the final report that we're going to talk about today. So again, a great collaboration, a great partnership. We were very happy to be involved. And now I'm going to turn it over to Rachel from the Delta Conservancy. Here's Jay and I's contact information if you've got questions, who's going to really kick us off into the meat of the analysis and the outcomes.
All right, thanks Campbell and Jay for that background and introduction. My name is Rachel Lane, and I'm an environmental scientist and Delta Drought Response Program Coordinator with the Delta Conservancy. Today I'll be co-presenting today with our other Rachel. Sometimes people call us the Rachels, but you can start that at the end of this presentation. So I'll be co-presenting today with Dr. Rachel Wigginton, Senior Environmental Scientist at the Delta Conservancy, about the analysis and outcomes of the 2023 DRIP program. So more thank yous here. Again, I'd like to echo what Campbell said. We'd really like to thank the California Department of Water Resources who provided funding for this program, the administrative team at the Delta Conservancy who carry out essential functions for our programs, including DRIP, and all members of the DRIP Oversight Committee in 2022 and 2023, as well as our large group of collaborators who provided feedback throughout this process. And a special thank you, our biggest thank you, to the growers who enrolled in this pilot program. Your willingness to experiment with your field management practices allowed us to learn more about water conservation potential in the Delta, and we're so grateful.
All right, thank you, Rachel Lane. So I'm the other Rachel, and I'll be just chatting for a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. So during this portion of the forum, Rachel and I are going to be sharing an overview of the 2023 DRIP analysis, some of the key takeaways from that analysis, some conclusions and recommendations for the future, and a bit of information about how you can learn more if you desire to do so. We'll have a few minutes at the end of this presentation for some questions, and then we're going to move into that longer facilitated discussion that Campbell mentioned, where you'll have a little bit more of an opportunity to share your responses and feedback to this analysis. I also want to highlight that everything we'll be sharing today is focused again on that 2023 DRIP program. And as Campbell mentioned a few minutes ago, there was a program in 2022, and the report detailing the 2022 analysis and results can be found on the Delta Conservancy's website. So during the 2023 water year, there were approximately 18,000 acres enrolled in both water conservation and beneficial bird habitat practices through the Delta Drought Response Pilot Program, with sites that were spread across the whole legal delta. And this map shows those 18,000 acres in red. Practices were carried out starting early in the calendar year 2023 and continued through the end of September 2023. And later on in the agenda, Billy from the Nature Conservancy is going to present the outcomes from those beneficial bird practices, while this presentation will really focus on the water conservation practices that were implemented. So across the fields that were enrolled in the program, we collected several different types of data that we used in the analysis that we're going to be presenting to you today. During the grant application and grant agreement phase, surveys were used to define the boundaries of each project site and also to find out information about what would have happened on the site if a grant was not awarded. Then progress reports and grant summaries were used to understand what happened on the project site during the water year, including things like crop planting and harvest dates, irrigation application for the few sites that did apply some irrigation, weed management practices, information about field drainage, as well as other practices that were happening on the site. Site visits were used to verify practices and discuss any emerging concerns that the grantees had. And then finally, we used OpenET, which Jay mentioned earlier, to measure evapotranspiration and estimate water savings. So how did we use OpenET to do that estimation of water savings? So first, just a little bit of level setting. Throughout this presentation, you'll be hearing us talk about evapotranspiration, or ET for short, which is the combination of evapotranspiration from the soil, and then evaporation from the soil, and also transpiration from plants. ET can be affected by things like humidity, temperature, wind speed, as well as the crop type and the size of the crop canopy on the field. And through this analysis, we measured ET as an estimate of water that is lost from the watershed and subsequently not available for other uses. So for this reason, we sometimes refer to ET just as, or interchangeably with the term consumptive use. So water lost from the system. OpenET is the tool that we chose to use. As Jay talked about, it's an emerging tool that we're really excited about for a few different reasons. First of all, it's open source, which means that it is available for anyone to use, and anyone is able to look at the methodologies that back up OpenET, and its accuracy has also been really well studied. OpenET is being used by lots of different actors in the Delta and beyond. And just a small explanation of how OpenET does that estimation of evapotranspiration. So essentially, it creates an ensemble of models that estimate the actual evapotranspiration on fields using the satellite measurements of things like surface temperature, light reflected from the surfaces of the Earth, as well as other land and water characteristics. We used OpenET model outputs to look at 3 different ways to measure the effects of the program's actions on water use and water savings. The first method, which you're seeing here, was just to look at water use. So in the report, we refer to this as consumptive use, which measures the actual evapotranspiration on the project fields during the 2023 water year. And the next 2 methods I'm going to share with you are estimates of water savings. So our normalized savings method, so we called it, allowed for a comparison of DRIP practices to actions on the same field in previous years, while attempting to remove the impacts of past climate conditions on those measurements. This calculation was done by measuring actual evapotranspiration on the project field in the project year 2023 and comparing that to the average ET of the same field over a 5-year period using what's called the reference evapotranspiration fraction, which helps to account for those weather and climate conditions that differ among years. Last, we had a comparative savings calculation. And this was done by measuring actual evapotranspiration on the project field during the 2023 water year, and then comparing that to the actual evapotranspiration on a comparison field during that same year, water year 2023. And this was where the grantees were extremely helpful to our analysis, since each grantee suggested a comparison field that was representative of what would have happened on their project field if the grant had not been awarded. And the Oversight Committee worked with our grantees to make sure that that was the best available comparison field to help us understand what would have been happening on the project field if the program had not happened. Now, there were differences in magnitude of savings between this normalized and comparative savings method, and the calculation methods led to some differences. But overall, the patterns of the results were pretty similar. So today, for both simplicity and time, we are going to be mostly focusing on this comparative savings during this presentation. And again, for those who are interested in more technical details, you want to read 100 pages about this analysis, we are going to be putting out a report next month that will be available on the Delta Conservancy's website.
So this map shows estimated savings calculated using a comparative savings estimate, with the acre feet per acre of estimated savings for each project symbolized by color. Projects with savings are green, with the highest savings shown in dark green. Projects with no savings or very minimal change from the baseline are shown in white. Projects with a net increase in water use compared to the baseline are pink. About half of the enrolled projects have some estimated savings. Overall, estimated savings were low. Using the comparative estimate calculation, there was a total of 1,890 acre-feet of water saved compared to the baseline. The site with the highest estimated savings saved 1.9 acre-feet of water per acre. This represents some of the highest potential savings, though this is likely not possible at all locations. The black shading indicates elevation values, with the darkest shading showing the areas that are the furthest below sea level. So you can see up here we have some of these higher elevation projects up here with no shading, and some of the lowest elevation projects here where this darkest shading is. As illustrated by this map, savings were not substantial despite the water conservation practices carried out by DRIP grantees, especially for fields at lower elevations. So why might field elevation matter? Even without applied irrigation, plants can grow vigorously if they have access to water, and these vigorously growing plants use water. And as we mentioned earlier, that water is then lost from the watershed and unavailable for other uses. Water can come from irrigations, precipitation, groundwater, and seepage. Lower elevation fields likely receive moisture from seepage and shallow groundwater, especially when growing deeply rooted crops or deeply rooted weeds. Fields at low elevation often use pumps to keep the root zone aerated, while fields at higher elevation often drain on their own. Additionally, peat soils are common in the delta and water moves laterally through those soils. Okay, so this map shows the project fields with the mean elevation of each field indicated by color. So in this case, the darkest red indicates lower elevations, while the lightest yellow and white shades indicate the highest elevations. The darker the color, the further below sea level the project is, and the lighter the color, the further above sea level the project is. A large portion of the project elevations are just a bit or below sea level, which you can see shown in these true yellow shades. So that's these colors here. So anything that's kind of that, got a rogue laser pointer here, it's a tough angle. So anything that's like this really solid yellow color is kind of right in the middle there, right around sea level. Most of the project fields enrolled in the 2023 program are below sea level. Only 26% of projects enrolled are above sea level. To look at this more closely, we performed a regression analysis, which found that fields at higher elevations more consistently save water. This plot displays water savings versus elevation. The y-axis shows estimated savings in acre-feet per acre, and the x-axis shows mean elevation for each project in feet. Each point represents a drip project. All projects that are below or right on the red line had no estimated savings. All projects above this red line did have estimated savings. The blue line is at 0 feet of elevation, so at sea level, and everything to the left of the blue line, shown in this light blue color, is below sea level. Everything to the right of the blue line is above sea level in light yellow. So again, we had more fields enrolled that were below sea level than above, so our sample size of projects above sea level was somewhat limited. Still, fields above sea level accounted for a disproportionate amount of total savings and saved water more consistently than fields below sea level. Elevation helps to explain some of this variation, but not all of it.
So another way to account for the differences in water saving among these different fields was to analyze them based on the field's water conservation practice type. And these were the categories that we had grantees enroll into, and then we further defined and refined during the analysis process. And they are shown here. So first, shifting crop type were fields that shifted from a more water-intensive crop, such as corn or tomatoes or alfalfa, to a crop that was thought to use less water, such as safflower or small grains. Deficit irrigated fields were fields that did not apply some portion of the business as usual irrigation amount. Fields that were foregoing a cash crop grew no crop on their project field during the months of June, July, August, and September of 2023. Other fields were split into two different categories for the sake of the analysis. Other perennial included a deficit irrigated mature vineyard and a deficit irrigated young almond orchard. And other annual included drip irrigated peppers and tomatoes. So these were the different water conservation practice types. And in this map, you'll be able to see the spread of these different water conservation practice types across the legal delta. So shift crop type is shown in orange, and we had 22 shift crop type fields with a little better than 5,000 acres enrolled in the program. Deficit irrigated fields, there were 18 of those with a little less than 5,000 acres enrolled. Foregoing a cash crop, we had 14 fields with about 4,300 acres enrolled. There were 4 different other fields with about 1,500 acres, for a total of 58 fields that were included in our analysis and almost 1,600 acres that was used for this analysis. So one of the results that we want to share with you today is that water savings estimates vary largely, both within and among these practice types. On the left, you'll see a graphic which displays these data. On the vertical axis is annual estimated water savings for each field, which is shown in acre-feet per acre. And on the horizontal axis are the different water conservation practice types. The data for each practice type are shown using a box and whisker plot, and these types of plots are really useful for visualizing the distribution of a variable. The black dots here represent the annual estimated water savings for each individual field. The dark line inside the box represents the median, which is the value that half of the data points fall above and half of the data points fall below. The two ends of the box, or the hinges, show the values under which 25% of the data points fall and 75% of the data points fall below the two hinges. And then the whiskers show the extent of the data furthest from that median, and anything outside of those whiskers is considered an outlier or a very different data point. So now you can see the range of data across all the different water conservation practice types. One thing I really want you to notice is how much overlap there is among these different practice types. So what we have determined through this analysis is that there's a lot of variability among the fields. Some of it is explained by elevation, but categorizing the practices based on these particular water conservation practice types didn't really help us further explain the variation in the data.
This pie chart shows the crops planted on the DRIP project fields during the 2023 water year. So as you can see, the fields grew a variety of crops were grown on the fields. And the crops most represented in our data were triticale with 13 projects, corn with 12 projects, wheat with 10, safflower with 8, none or no crop grown with 5, and 3 with pasture. This plot shows water savings versus elevation with only those 6 most replicated crops symbolized. So corn is symbolized by these dots, none is shown with triangles, pasture with solid cubes, safflower with crosses, triticale with these boxes with X's in them, and wheat with asterisks. None of the crop and elevation combinations were highly replicated. As a result, there's no clear pattern about which crops have the most water saving potential. However, there's a few interesting patterns that we can speculate about. So these green circles show deficit irrigated pasture, which saved water across varying elevations. Even at low elevations, deficit irrigated pasture still showed some water savings, and the project with the highest water savings was a deficit irrigated pasture field, also at the highest elevation. These dark yellow circles show deficit irrigated corn, which was variable in terms of savings. Additionally, all of the deficit irrigated corn samples came from fields with a mean elevation below sea level. So we can't say anything about what savings for corn might be at higher elevations or whether deficit irrigating corn at higher elevations would have a high enough yield to be financially viable. Additionally, the baseline that's used really matters when calculating savings. These red circles highlight fields that shifted away from alfalfa to another crop or practice, and all fields which shifted away from alfalfa had estimated water savings across practice, calculation methods, and elevation. Just crop type and elevation together can help explain some of the variability, but we would need higher sample sizes and a more even spread across the elevation gradient to fully understand how these factors impact water savings potential. So savings variation may have been driven by elevation or crop type, but it could also have been driven by vegetation management practices, field soil type, and local flooding. Our analysis this year didn't cover vegetation management or soil type directly, but we did look at the differences between the 2022 and 2023 water years, which may help explain the role of local flooding and water year difference.
So 2022 and 2023 were very different water years, as you all probably experienced. And there's a couple key differences I want to point out. First, air temperatures were lower in 2023. So on the graphic to the left, you'll see average daily air temperature on the vertical axis and months of the water year on the horizontal axis. Total precipitation was also much higher in 2023. On this graphic, you see cumulative precipitation in inches on the vertical axis and months of the water year on the horizontal axis. So due in part to this higher level of precipitation, flooding was much more common on project fields in 2023 than in 2022. In fact, Over 50% of the fields in our study experienced some level of weather-related flooding during the 2023 water year. And all three of these factors potentially contributed to higher soil moisture on fields in 2023. Now, I just want to strongly caveat that it would be really difficult for us to say anything about the relationship between water year and potential for water savings without looking across more than just 2 years. That being said, we did have a small number of fields that were enrolled in both the 2022 and 2023 programs. So in this graphic to the left, you see consumptive use. So this is not estimated savings as we've been looking at on previous slides. So in this case, lower values indicate lower water use. And on the vertical axis, you'll see ET in acre feet per acre. And on the horizontal axis, you'll see the 13 fields that were enrolled in both years as letters A through M. The red circles represent annual consumptive use on the project field during 2022, while the blue triangles represent annual consumptive use on the fields during 2023. So average ET in 2022 is lower than in 2023. So an example of this, if you look at field A, you'll see an example of water year 2023 having about half an acre foot higher ET in 2023 than in 2022. However, if you look across the fields, you'll notice that that difference between the 2 years really varies field to field, and a few fields, like field F, actually have higher consumptive use in 2022. Again, this is a very small sample size, but we hypothesized that plants were healthier and able to grow better because of the more favorable conditions, particularly high soil moisture in 2023. And more vigorously growing plants equals more ET.
So in conclusion, future water conservation programs and regulations will need to balance actions that produce the most water savings with consideration for climate and biodiversity objectives. For example, beneficial bird habitat practices were challenging to incorporate into the analysis of water savings, but these practices resulted in substantial numbers of birds observed on fields. Crop planting often takes place before water year conditions are apparent. And as we've talked about throughout this forum, droughts are multi-year and variable, and programs that address drought need to be flexible enough to respond accordingly. Future water conservation programs could work closely with growers to build in flexibility for postponement or rapid deployment of water conservation practices, depending on water year conditions. Open source remote sensing satellite estimates of evapotranspiration, like those from OpenET, make it possible to cost-effectively measure water use, index overall water use, and study the factors that drive evapotranspiration changes. Additional studies could identify field characteristics such as elevation and soil type, and practices such as crop type, vegetation management, tillage, etc., and specific regions within the Delta or beyond that are likely to produce the most cost-effective and efficient water savings. If you'd like to learn more, we'll be sending out an email announcement once the final version of the DRIP report is published on our website next month. That's for the 2023 report. The 22 report is already up. The data will be anonymized and made available most likely on the CNRA Open Data website. And once they are available, we'll post a link on our website, as will the Office of the Delta Water Master. Thank you all for listening. We have a few minutes dedicated to questions and answers, and then we'll transition into our first discussion where you'll be able to reflect further on these results. And I think Martha is going to go around with the microphone to anybody who has questions.
Apologies, I can't stay for long. I've got a prior engagement, but yeah, just a couple thoughts on your overall experiment design. My name is Brett Baker. Delta farmer, I guess today. You guys really focused on the macro, and I think you should really try and focus on the micro. I don't know if anybody's here from the Nature Conservancy, but Jay and Campbell, I don't know if you can speak to this. When I drove across Staten today, you guys are planting potatoes over there, and there's a levee over on Bean Ranch. Those are other things that happen here locally in the Delta. You guys are going, it seems like you're still in an experimental design, really. You don't have a hypothesis, you're not I mean, other than does water use fluctuate due to practices on the land? Obviously it does, but is that more a function of the practices or of the hydrology of this area? And if you want to go out and experiment, I suggest you should do it on places like Staten. If you can bring that map back up, I don't think you have a single field there. And the Bean Ranch, or there's plenty of state-owned property to do things like this. And I feel like, you know, coming in on a year when it's a dry year and then backing out on a year when it's a wet year, I think those are things that just, if you're gonna do a drive-by analysis, this is my drive-by analysis, that you could do better. And if you guys really wanna nail in and drill in on some of this data, go do it on a micro level. Go look how a particular piece of property functions on a particular water year. And I think what you're gonna find, by and large, if you look at OpenAT, if you look at the hydrology of the delta, is most of it has been reclaimed. There is a little bit of fuzziness around the numbers, but when you look at evaporative transpiration, you look at irrigated ag in the delta, it's gonna fluctuate based on crops, sure, but it's not fluctuating the whole lot. It's not the big part of the bowl. And you guys should be looking at, if you want to like try to endure a program that works, you ought to be looking at what are the things that we can do ourselves to have a better target for what we're trying to do. This is, you know, I think, the buckshot. And so I think that you have those opportunities to look at that from high to low, gradient, above sea level, below sea level, on a place like Staten Island. You go look around the Bean Ranch. A lot of state-owned properties in the Delta to do these sorts of examinations. And then get a refined hypothesis from that. I think that's what you got to do.
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, I think those are all really great suggestions. And I know you said you can't stay long, but in the latter half of the forum, the research team from UC Davis is going to discuss in detail the ongoing multi-year study that they're doing on 6 sites in the Delta. So we'll get to hear more from them. And we're also going to be hearing more from everyone else about suggestions for what types of research and studies we want to see going forward. So yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Consultant for Metropolitan Water District. It seems from your preliminary results and from other things I've been hearing in other forums that the variation between soil type and elevation seems to drive results more than, so in other words, maybe it's better to have a program that is based more regionally and less one size fits all for the whole Delta with a little more sensitivity. Maybe you don't have to say the North region has this type, maybe it's if you've got this type of soil and elevation, this is the program you can enroll in. And if you have this type of soil and this elevation, this is the program you can enroll in. But it does seem like the scattershot results is because the Delta is not homogeneous. So that would just be my observation and suggestion going forward. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I think that, you know, as we move forward, if there were future years of this program, we would really take that sort of thing to heart, like in our selection criteria. And I'm hearing a lot of like commentary, I think that's really relevant to the next portion of our agenda, which is this broader discussion that we're gonna have, that's gonna be moderated by Michelle Linfelder-Miles, who's here with us. So I'm gonna invite her up and our note takers up. Thank you all so much. If you have specific questions about the analysis, feel free to find Rachel and I.
All right, hello everybody. Thanks to both the Rachels for the information about the results that we found. So again, my name is Michelle Linfelder-Miles. I'm a foreign advisor with UC Cooperative Extension. And so why am I up here today? I was one of the members of the Oversight and Selection committees in both 2022 and 2023. And so along with a couple other UC colleagues, some of whom you'll hear from today, We were helping to kind of provide some context, some Delta context, some environmental context to the results that we're seeing. There were some comments that were already made that I think tie into some of the questions that we have up here. So with that as introduction, I want to also introduce Angie and Maya. They're going to be the note takers. You'll see 4 different flip charts that relate to the 4 questions that you have here in front of you. So we're going to go through those questions in order, but we wanted you to have all 4 questions in front of you because we realized, you know, maybe your mind might be thinking more on one thing versus another. So if there becomes a lull in the conversation and you want to skip questions, that's totally fine. We're going to kind of go free form here. But those are the questions we're going to address. If there's something that's not here, we actually have a second discussion in the agenda. So there's going to be another presentation and we're going to have another discussion with different topics up here on the board. So it might be that we'll address something that you bring up now in the later discussion. It might be that that's a topic that we have to, you know, put on the flip chart that we help address at a future time. So I just kind of wanted to give that layout for the agenda and what we hope to accomplish in this discussion, but also the next one that's coming up. Okay, so we'll start with the question, what is your reaction to the results? And I think we've heard a couple of things that I want to make sure that we capture eventually. So you might hear me intercede at some point to reflect on Julie, or Julie, you're still here, but Brett's comments that he brought up already.
Hi, I'm Melinda Terry with the North Delta Water Agency, and our agency, along with South and Central Delta Water Agencies, who initially met with the state and about them funding this program. And I think from my perspective, I mean, we told them early on, I have a different reaction than the first 2 people. It's a little bit of what we expected in some sense because of the variation in the Delta is so large. But what I liked about the map, frankly, was that I feel like there was a good cross-section, you know, both regionally, elevation-wise, the different type of mechanisms that were tried, because this was an investment by the state. And I know they had expectations about a lot of water savings that might happen, but it was a pilot project, right? So these micro results, you know, are not really intentional at this point. I hope it doesn't end up in a regulatory thing. Our hope was to work with the state so that we could get really scientific results for them to make decisions when we do hit these drought periods, to be willing to make an investment with farmers to pay them to try to get these savings. So rather than regulatory, I'm hoping it leads to a more permanent tool in the state's toolbox to work with farmers. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. So Maya's capturing some of your comments, and I'll say at this point that if there's something that you think isn't getting captured in the way that you wanted it to get captured, be sure to bring that up. If not now, then maybe a little bit later, because as we get more notes, it might be hard to see from where you're sitting. So don't be afraid to, you know, flag one of us and let us know that you think we maybe need to capture it a little bit differently. Any other reactions to the results?
Hi, Erin Mullen from the Delta Stewardship Council. This is actually kind of a question, and I'm sorry if I'm asking out of turn. But one of the things that I'm confused about, and I'm hoping that can be responded to, is for a large part of the Delta, we don't have a shortage of water even during a drought. What we have a shortage of is water quality. And so what I'm struggling to understand is how that aspect, you know, like how that was incorporated into the objectives of the study and what you were looking for in that regard. I mean, especially in the western portion of the Delta, I mean, the water surface is almost exclusively tidally influenced. So even in a drought, you're really not going to see water surface elevations drop a lot. So I mean, so these kinds of things, like when I'm listening to, you know, what you put up there, and what the work that you did, and maybe this gets back to Melinda's comment about like variability. It's just, I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm interested how that fed into all of it, and I'm sorry if it's not as directed as you would like it to be.
I don't know if Campbell or Jay want to address that. I mean, that kind of brings up questions that need to reflect on how the program was developed and in consultation with folks from North Delta, Central, South Delta water agencies. Those are things
Yeah,
that were happening before this work that you saw today even began. So I want
guess I
to
can't really
allocate time
have,
for that.
I'm like, I can't really have a reaction to the outcome without understanding that question, so
Let me just quickly try. I mean, I think
Sure.
in severe drought, the water agencies came together with the state and said, how do we manage this drought? The objective really was, how do we reduce consumptive use, potentially leaving flow in the rivers, in the system, to improve water quality and environmental outcomes. We also talked very intentionally about not making sure that water wasn't available for export. That, we weren't trying to increase exports. We wanted to make sure that any benefit. And really, it was an overall pilot program to really demonstrate whether or not we could achieve that objective.
And I think just to close on that, Aaron, that we just, with the hypothesis at its most extreme being how much water can we produce for net flow benefit, it really didn't produce water for in-stream flow benefit necessary to actually move the needle with respect to water quality. So I think that's something that, I think we'd want to test that out a bit further and, where are you working in the system for net channel benefit. And I think there's some things that we might be able to tease out a bit more, but we didn't see it in this data set.
Hi, I'm Ben Leacox. I'm a farmer in Delta. So I guess looking at your results, my main comment is this thing working?
It is.
Is especially like looking at the crop shift program, timing is crucial. So like, I'm not the scientist in the room, but my understanding of the water system is, there's a lot of water, even in a drought year when we do have some rains early in the year to keep the water quality up in the Delta. And so with a crop shift program such as safflower, wheat, and these other small grains, you're basically changing the timing. It's not necessarily about your consumptive use through the year, but changing the timing of when you use the use to allow more water in the system to be in place and not be pulling it out at the time when it's most crucial for other people to be irrigating, higher value crops and more sensitive crops. So there just was nothing said about timing in what was presented.
I think that actually, Ben, is a great point and one that we could address on the mechanism flip chart. Because I think what I hear you saying is that the ET could have still been at some level because you're still growing a crop. You're just growing that crop at a different time when the water's available. So when you're annualizing ET over a period of time, which is what they did, right? The water year, October 1 through September 30th. That annual number, if there's a crop out there, it's gonna transpire, right?
Correct. A crop still uses 3 acre feet, 4 acre feet. Yes, some use more, some use less. But at the end of the day, I guess I need to step back and assume not everybody has the farming knowledge. At the end of the day, if you're planting a small grain that's planted in the winter, that crop's growing in the early spring and using its water that was basically provided by the rainfall if you're not irrigating it. So your safflowers, your wheat, it's still using 3 acre feet of water, but it's using it from, January to, May, June, instead of when you plant tomatoes or you plant corn, and now you're having to pull water out of the system, from May to September, which is, the dry part of the year, and water qualities, that's when we have the most problem with water qualities in the Delta.
I've got one comment back here and then I'll.
Maurice Washington, Secure Family Estates. First, I want to say thank you for the opportunity. It's rare that the state provides additional funding to help farmers out. I'm a little surprised by the outcome, but then I'm not because of the dynamic environment out here. Just to piggyback off of the gentleman's comment up here, you're going to have transpiration throughout the year. One thing you might want to take into account is how high the water table is in the delta, and maybe continuously monitoring that water table throughout the season, because we grow vines, so if they're 3 feet or 4 feet down, they might be potentially tapped into that groundwater and how that impacts water use. And then also the difference between water consumption with rainfall versus how much water we have to pump or irrigate in. So actually trying to quantify what irrigation amount that we're actually pumping in as well to do more of a mass balance of what you're getting from Open ET. Because Open ET is looking at just that whole field boundary, maybe some of the weeds as well. And then just for the overall experience of the program, it was fairly straightforward, fairly easy with the reporting, with the pictures, what we had to turn in. And I personally want to thank you guys because we had some issues with our check. But we worked it out. But the overall process is straightforward. It's probably one of the easiest grants that I've been a part of. So I'm very appreciative of that.
All right, thank you, Maurice. So we've captured that because one of our questions at the very end was, how was your experience? And for that question, we really want to hear from the growers in particular. So if there were things about the application, things about implementing the practices, that's where we want to capture that here. So again, we're a little bit limited in time in terms of this discussion, but that doesn't mean we don't want to get your feedback. And so certainly at this point, if we want to jump around to different questions that are named on the different flip charts or here in a different order. So again, the question that we've mostly been addressing is, what is your reaction to the outcomes? But the next questions are, is there anything surprising? We heard from Melinda that maybe it wasn't entirely surprising in terms of the results, so we could probably capture that on one of the flip charts. What do you think is the mechanism? So we've heard about some of those ideas, and then how was your experience? So those are our 4 questions that we're still trying to address.
We appreciate Maureen's patience. It was like an act of Congress to them. So when he walked in, I was like, I know you.
Thank you, John Herrick, South Delta Water Agency. First, I can say that this was a really good program. It's not that it solves all the problems, but we've gathered a lot of good information. The analysis was excellent. I appreciate that. And again, doing it on a short term with relying on volunteers to come forward, really hindered the scope of it. But with that said, I agree with Melinda. The results seem to be consistent with what we thought before, which is the lower you get in the delta, the less likely you can do things to save water. So that leads to 2 different things. The first is the outcomes were down the lower delta where they had significant savings. Maybe we should concentrate on that in the future to better explain that and see if there is something to do. But the future program that we might get together someday and put together then focuses on those higher elevation lands. And there could be significant savings in those. The gentleman's point about when the transpiration occurs is very, very important, and that would be part of the program. As long as we recognize that sometimes stored water is being released in winter to meet water quality standards, and they do want further decrease in evapotranspiration. So anyway, from South Delta's perspective, we think this has been a great program. How it's funded or if it continues in the future to find out more specifics. And I think everybody's interested in sitting down and saying, okay, what sort of voluntary program can we conceive of for future droughts so that farmers have enough warning, people have signed up ahead of time, they can figure out if they want to participate and do that. Because I think we can save water regardless of the arguments about whether we have water or not in underwater rains. So I just congratulate everybody, this has been really good.
So I want to make sure that we're capturing some of these ideas. So I think in terms of mechanism, we've heard elevation. So obviously that was part of the analysis. So in terms of kind of describing why did we see what we saw, elevation has been commented on a couple of times. Julie in the back, before we really got started on this discussion, talked about different soil types. And I want to address that point very briefly. So we did look at different soil types in 2022. But and you're right, the soils are very different in the Delta, but so different that even in one field, you could have 3 or 4 different soil types. That being said, we tried to find comparison fields in 2022 that could mirror the program field as best as we could, and we did consider soil type in 2022. The problem is we could almost never find the match in soil types between the comparison field and the program field because we're trying to match the crop. We're trying to keep the same grower. We're trying to keep the same irrigation practice. We're trying to keep similar planting and harvesting dates. So there were a lot of things we were trying to keep track of in that comparison field. And that's not to discount your comment about soil type. Definitely soil type's gonna play a role. But it ended up being one of those things that we dropped from the criteria for comparison fields in 2023 because of the challenges we had in 2022. We're basically, time's up. Any last piece of feedback before we move on? And like I said, there's a second discussion. We'll have another 15 or so minutes, 20 minutes maybe, to talk some more. We can address these if something else comes to you. And we can talk about future programming because that'll be one of the questions.
In response to the last gentleman that spoke, yes, it was a great program. It worked. There's a lot of things I think we can do in the Delta to save water. There's some things I threw out there in a proposal that weren't even accepted. That probably would have had the highest water savings of anything in the D Delta under lower water tables. As I think everybody's kind of wrapped their head around, there's a high groundwater table. That's the issue with growing plants, or with our water being used throughout the year. So really, you need to eliminate vegetation in order to reduce consumptive use of water. So, there's Johnson grass is a real issue out in the Delta, and it uses more water than any of the crops that we currently grow. If you go on the open ET, it's the spots that are too wet for me to farm that actually use more water on my ranch than anywhere else. And so, like, one of my proposals I put in, which I guess didn't fit in one of the boxes, so nobody selected it, was I would go in and basically disc that Johnson grass regularly and spray it to do whatever I could to keep it clean. And that would have eliminated far more consumptive use of water than anything else. Anyways, kind of a side comment. The other thing is, I lost my train of thought.
I'm glad that's not just me.
Okay, there was one other comment that Brett brought up at the beginning before he left the room, and that was to look at the micro scale. And so I just want to give recognition to his comment, because that's in fact, it's too bad he had to leave, because that's exactly what Cosima is going to be talking about in a few minutes' time. So just wanted to recognize his comment, say that that's part of the study as well. And with that, I think I'll step down and welcome up Billy.
Hi everyone, my name is Billy Abbott. I'm the Avian Field Science Manager with the Nature Conservancy, and I'm going to talk to you all a little bit today about the bird benefit outcomes that were a result of the DRIP program. So to put it all in context a little bit, so drought conditions present dire conditions for birds, and particularly water birds. And on the natural landscape, there isn't a lot of wetland habitat out there for these birds in general, but in drought conditions, that wetland habitat is shrunk by an additional 30 to 80%. So we were really happy to have the opportunity to partner with the Delta Conservancy and others to be able to provide some habitat for these birds in this time when they really need it. Kind of a look at what we did. We offered 2 bird benefit practices with DRIP. There was the flooded water bird habitat and the nesting habitat, and I'll explain both of those. But between the 2 practices, we were able to put out about 5,100 acres of bird habitat during the drought, and it cost us about $415,000 to do so. So the first type of habitat I'll talk about is the flooded water bird habitat, and some of the reasons why it's important. So historically, up until around the 1850s, there was about 4 million acres of wetland habitat in the Central Valley. And that huge amount of habitat supported a huge amount of birds. In the winter, estimates of waterfowl were between 50 and 80 million birds supported in the valley, and that's just waterfowl, so geese, ducks, and things like that. Fast forward to around the 1990s, there's been a lot of construction of levees that are cutting off connectivity between the rivers and the wetland systems, as well as a large amount of land conversion from wetlands to urban areas and mostly wetlands to ag. And that deleted a lot of that habitat off the landscape. So over 90% of the wetland habitat is now gone. And with the habitat goes the birds, right? So now we support still 3 to 4 million waterfowl, which seems like a lot currently, but you look back historically, it's almost nothing. And currently are supporting around 350,000 shorebirds in the valley. We don't have historical numbers for shorebirds, but we're certain that they were higher than they currently are. Shorebirds have been one of the hardest hit groups of birds out there. They have about a 40% decline in abundance total as a group since the 70s, and about 70% of our shorebird species in North America are in decline. So that's 29 of our species are in decline. Of those, 10 have lost more than 50% of their population in the last 40 years. So shorebirds have been really struggling. So it's important that we provide the habitat that they need. And what shorebirds need is mudflat habitats. So they like shallow flooding with a mud bottom. So they're feeding on benthic invertebrates that live in the soil. And to create that mudflat habitat, we had a couple management requirements. The one was incorporating the veg or crop residue in the fields into the soil, so it creates that mud bottom. And the second is just a shallow flood. So the deepest we allowed is 4 inches. Of this flooded waterbird habitat, we were able to get about 4,900 acres out there, a little over 1,100 in the fall, a little over 3,700 in the spring. And we did this at $75 an acre for a total of $365,000, almost $366,000. Flooding during the drought might seem a little counterintuitive, but the reason has kind of been touched on before is to mitigate for some of those drought conditions for the birds. So all the properties that did provide flooded waterbird habitat were also enrolled in other water savings practices through drip. Out there on the landscape, what we saw, we did a lot of surveys. So we set up 20 survey points in 8 different fields and did about 230 surveys out there. On those surveys, we encountered over 10,000 birds of 42 different species. So we have pretty good density and pretty good variety of birds out there. Some of the interesting things that came out of it, I guess one interesting point that came out of this was that shorebirds tended to use the rice fields a lot more than the cornfields. We know from other habitat programs and science we've done that they're happy to use both. And there's a couple drivers that may have been responsible, but the likely driver for them using the rice was the depth. So in the drip program, the cornfields, for whatever reason, tended to be flooded a little more deeply to just over 5 inches, while the rice fields were just about 4 inches of depth. And that extra inch of depth really precludes a lot of our small shorebirds, especially, from being able to access that habitat. Overall, the flooded waterbird habitat performed pretty well. Like I said, we had good density, good variety of birds out there, so we were pretty happy with the response that we did get, though. The other habitat type we offered or provided was the nesting habitat. So the goal of this was to provide nesting habitat for uplands for grassland species as well as waterfowl species. Grasslands are another habitat type like wetlands that have been extremely depleted in California. They're easy to develop. And it's thought that in the Central Valley, especially for our breeding waterfowl, nesting habitat is one of the limiting factors. And for grassland species, just like shorebirds are another group of birds who have been hit extremely hard by population declines. Over 50% decline in abundance in grassland species since the 1970s, and over 75% of grassland species are in decline. So it's just another dire situation for this group of birds. So to get some habitat that mimics natural grassland habitats out there without using a lot of water, we had a couple practices that were required. One was that these were not irrigated for water savings. And the second was that these need to be covered in at least 60% of veg that was at least 8 inches high. And again, this is to mimic that the structure of the natural grassland habitats that are out there, and hopefully give these birds a place to nest. Of this habitat, we were able to put out a little over 1,200 acres. We did this for a little cheaper at $40 an acre, and it cost us about $49,000 to get this out there. The bird response here was a little varied. I had 11 survey locations at 5 separate properties. On those 11 surveys, we encountered 187 individual birds of 27 species. So we averaged about 17 birds of 6 different species per survey. And then the other things that we looked for were evidence of nesting. These were things like material carried by parents or food carries, and seeing fledglings and actual nests themselves. So we found nests of several grassland species, like the blue grosbeak, which is pictured up there, as well as some of the waterfowl species, and especially we found waterfowl nests in fields that had water in close proximity, as you might expect. But yeah, again, this habitat probably performed a little less well than the flooded waterbird habitat, but we still had decent results and good use out of it. On both these habitat types, there's things that we think that we could do better moving forward. For the flooded waterbird habitat, timing is probably the biggest thing. So these fields in the DRIP program were flooded in October, and this was largely due to issues with mosquito abatement that we had to push the flooding later into the season. But shifting that habitat into an earlier timing would make a big difference for the shorebirds. Shorebirds tend to show up pretty early in the valley, starting in mid-July or so, and there's just really not a lot of flooded habitat on the landscape then. We realized that there's some complications with timing and farming with that early start date. That is when the birds need it. So if we can get the habitat out there, then that would be ideal. And then also shallower flooding. So like I said, in those cornfields that were a little too deep precluded even some of the larger shorebirds. But all of the fields were flooded to about 4 inches. And if we can even bring that down a little bit, we might have some better access for some of the smaller shorebirds out there. And then nesting habitat. Just increasing variability in that habitat in general. So these fields were very homogeneous across. They tended to be one species, all about the same height of vegetation. So introducing things like multi-species cover crops, so maybe some topographic structure out in those fields or brush piles, and as well as increasing the patchiness of planting, so it's not all the same throughout. And then just a general decrease in vegetation density in that nesting habitat would also likely help, especially for the waterfowl side of things. A lot of those fields were very densely packed with veg, and it would kind of made it hard for those waterfowl to get in and access that habitat. Just kind of a quick plug for a few other programs. There's a bird return program that many of you are probably aware of, but that's put on by the Nature Conservancy, Audubon, and Point Blue. Together they make the Migratory Bird Conservation Partnership. We run programs in the fall, winter, and spring. We have a crane program coming up that is for the Delta and the Sac Valley, so you can go to birdreturns.org and check that out. California Rice Commission puts on Bid for Birds, which is exclusively for rice farmers in the Delta and the Sac Valley. Cal Trout has a fish food program, and then CDFW and NRCS also run various habitat programs in different geographies throughout the year. And then just wrap it up with a quick thank you. So thank you to DWR, the Delta Water Master, the Delta Conservancy, and CDFW for making this happen. And then also a big thanks to the farmers who participated and put out that bird habitat for us. So thank you all very much for your time.
Okay, so that brings us to our second discussion. Once again, we have all the questions here on the slide, and Maya and Angie are going to be our note takers again, and they're going to have the new questions on the Post-it notes. I want to just kind of recall a couple of points that were made in the first discussion that I think are relevant to the questions we have here. I'm kind of waiting for Angie and Maya to be ready. I don't want to jump start too much. But the questions are, what other practices do you suggest might save water aside from the ones included in the program? Second question is, what studies would you like to see carried out in the Delta? What are ideas for programs or other types of support that would be helpful in the future? Are there any other resources you have access that might be of interest to this group? And then kind of open discussion. So those are the topics we're talking about now. On the point of other practices, we heard Ben talk about vegetation management. So I want to make sure that we capture that. That's question number 2. I don't know what side we're on. No, what other practices? Sorry, that was question 1. What other practices? Vegetation management. And then what studies would you like to see carried out? We heard John Herrick talk about high elevation studies, so I just wanted to make sure we captured that.
Well, and the other thing he said was that even in the lower elevations, there were examples of success, and maybe just focus in on those whys.
Okay.
If we already know the why from what's been already done, that's one thing, but if not, then it's something different.
No, I think there's room to learn more why.
I'm just gonna ask you a really quick question while I have the microphone, because now I'm confused. I thought we only had funding for the 2 years. Do we have funding to keep this going? Because I'm kind of excited if we do, but I'm unclear on that.
So the funding is for the micrometeorological study, but in terms of.
That's a prior presentation that we.
That's correct.
And
Yeah.
the bird returns.
And the bird, okay.
But in terms of the
But even through their
widespread
programs, we could still do these similar type things that were related to the first 2 years. Because they're still all about the macro, trying to figure some of this out.
The 3-year program with COSNA is already determined, the fields are determined, so that's not an open grant. But the bird returns program with the Nature Conservancy and Audubon and Walnut Grove is open for folks.
Maurice had his hand up in the back.
To save water, I know up here in North Delta, we have sloughs, and we irrigate out of our sloughs, so dealing with the aquatic invasive vegetation like water hyacinth, and treating that will help save water.
Okay, so what?
Especially in a drought year.
Yeah. That's great, Maurice, thank you. So what other practices? We could say vegetation management in sloughs, invasive weeds.
Yeah, the Department of Boating and Waterways, already spends some money on that, but to the extent you kind of start marrying some of these things together.
Okay, and I've been asked to remind folks to keep the microphone closer to their mouth.
One of the things that we didn't highlight but will be referenced in the report is in year 2, year 1, it was a 900 an acre fixed payment to farmers for enrolling in the program. Year 2 borrowed a reverse auction methodology that the Nature Conservancy applies in its bird returns program, and you can effectively, so highest bidder in a traditional auction, lowest bidder wins in a reverse auction, and we can control for other factors such as elevation and soil conditions and geography away from the Central Delta. And so you can put all that into the program and then really favor the least cost delivery for the greatest conservation benefit. And that methodology showed a higher return per acre of investment for conservation. So for those of you watching, and I think we all need to be concerned about this, is what's the most efficient from a cost and habitat and conservation benefit perspective? That reverse auction methodology really works, and we should probably be applying it in a lot of other government programs. But having said that, I think that one of the elements of the report is that I know they're crunching data still in this, but it does show a significant cost-benefit return, and we hadn't really discussed that. So I just think it's important to kind of think about that element of the program, because it does help us achieve a greater level of efficiency.
maybe to that point, oh, go ahead, Ben.
Just a comment on that, the reverse auction may be great from your side, from the farmer's side, it's a challenge. It is challenging because of planning. You know,
So it needs, time cycle needs.
yeah, if the time cycle was sooner, it could probably be diminished, but it's always seemed like by the time I'm getting an answer on what I'm doing, I'm already moving for the year and it's like hard to make these last minute changes. So, timing could definitely be improved.
So you're saying you would want earlier?
Yeah, if you're, especially if it's gonna be kind of an auction sort of system. I mean, the benefit of the other system is I sign up, I'm pretty sure I know what I'm gonna get, boom, away we go, right?
Yeah.
Like, the reverse auction, there's a lot of, oh, did I bid cheap enough? Am I gonna get this program? And so it adds just another layer of variability to it that I don't know how that plan.
I think that fits well into one of our first questions. How was your experience? And so Angie's going to capture that on one of the previous flip charts. But also, Ben, I wanted to re-highlight, I mentioned vegetation management. I re-highlighted that for you. But I think there was something else you said earlier about how you had a few different applications and you think the practice that would have saved the most water wasn't actually selected through the reverse auction process, and that conversation didn't happen in terms of, you know, between the program and the grower. And so that might be another thing, highlight somewhere, is that conversation with the grower, like what does the grower think? And we had a little bit more of that in 2022, but then with the reverse auction process in 2023, maybe a little bit of that was lost. And so I think that might be a good thing to highlight in terms of making sure that we're recognizing the experience on the ground in terms of what could actually save the most water.
I agree, well put.
You were more succinct than me though.
Yeah, actually, just to build on what the two of you were saying, something I think that would be useful to examine is, I mean, we all know nature abhors a vacuum. So if you fallow a field, if you don't plant, you know, what grows there? You know, I mean, what are the consequences of not actively managing a field, and is something going to grow that is going to use more water? I think maybe looking a little bit more into the, you know, the I don't remember what that scenario was called, but you know, the farmers that were paid to just not grow anything. Fallow. I you know, I think dialing down into that a little bit more would probably be useful.
So, that was kind of goes back to the previous thing I was talking about. It really depends on where you are. If you're at higher and you don't have higher elevation, you don't have this water table, fallowing alone is very effective, right? Because it's not, vegetation isn't going to continue to grow. When you farm in an area like I do, where the water table is 6 inches to 3 feet, fallowing uses far more water than actually growing a crop.
Right.
Which is kind of something that we've always been back and forth with the state on. That's why we push for this consumptive use model.
Yeah.
Because we actually save them money by farming, or save them water by farming at the end of the day. So, kind of goes back to the vegetation management idea that I had, which is, hey, I have these parts that are too wet, the water table's too high, I can't even farm them. If I can manage them in a way to minimize vegetation growing, some of those places, if I've played around on OPT, are using 8-10 acre feet of water a year. Like, it's substantial, far more than any of my farm areas. And so if I can do something to minimize that vegetation growth in those areas, I would save far more water consumptively than I would anywhere else.
Maya, I think in terms of practices, so we have vegetation management, I can't see that far, my eyes aren't that good, but do you have something about just fallowing and how, fallow lands being managed for vegetation? Maybe
Yes.
making that an extra point. So I think it's a little bit, it could be the same, but it could be a little bit different in
Michelle,
terms
do you
of
remember the
practices.
guidance on that? I mean, we wanted people to leave stubble if possible, so we didn't have bare soil, but I don't, do you recall the specifics of what we included?
I think we had that more in 2022, and in 2023, we didn't have that stipulation, or it was a little bit different, but I'm looking at the two Rachel experts.
Yeah, in 2023 in the grant agreements, it was, the wording was something like, we leave it up to your best farming management knowledge to make your decisions about vegetation management. So it was more up to the farmers and a little less stipulated in 2023 than in 2022.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that to say, I think for folks who are also doing the bird benefits practices, that there was really specific vegetation management guidance for the bird benefits, but not just for the water conservation practices.
I just want to reiterate a couple of our questions where I don't think we've gotten too many responses yet. So what are ideas for programs or other types of support that would be helpful in the future? And are there other resources that you have accessed that might be of interest to this group? So if there are other programs that you think have been successful working with Delta landowners or anything else like that?
Alex Wilson, Delta farmer. To Ben's point, he kind of nailed a lot of the things that I felt. I participated in 22, but not in 23, but all good. It was honestly, it was a wonderful experience. We as Delta farmers, there was a large community that was really kind of in favor for it. The one thing that I guess not necessarily helpful in the future, but one thing that I'd like to promote is those workshops were awesome. I went to a couple of them just because I was the one filling out the application, so I didn't really know what to do. And I went to a couple of them and I learned a lot. I met a lot of people. It's nice to see the people that you're emailing and things like those lines, but overall, it's a wonderful program. I hope that it continues in whatever capacity that it can, given the funding constraints. But I guess as a community, we commend you guys for all the hard work you did. So I guess in the future, maybe more workshops. I think you guys had several in different areas. One at Gene Harvey, and it was just overall a great job. So, anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. We're going to capture that on one of our previous sticky notes.
I'm a new farmer, started a couple of years back, and thank you so much. Special shout out to Rachel and Martha for guiding me through this program. Unfortunately, when I started, the drought hit, and I was learning all these new things, and then second year into it, this program came in, and it became a savior for me. And what I would like to see next is, I really like the idea of somebody who was talking about, I think Judy or somebody, like soil type and water management practices around it, having more guidance, and not just in drought year, but in general, what kind of practices as a farmer or somebody who's starting into this field to begin with can use and incorporate so that we save water even and have more sustainable farming.
Thank you, Nina. That might have just been like something put on my to-do list as a cooperative sentence. And Kosin is going to help me.
Hi, Ann Williams here, representing Delta farmers and water rights holders. Some additional guidance or support in the future I think would be helpful, mainly from Jay and his office. Timing with water right reporting. I know you don't want to talk water rights, Jay, but just how best can
That was just when John Herrick was here.
But how best can farmers participating in this program document these conservation efforts and protect those underlying water rights as they're taking these actions? And the timing of when annual reports are due versus the timing of getting this data, and some direction on how best to fill out those forms to do that would be helpful for water users.
Thank you.
I think we could capture that on this, hand you the sticky note in the back. How was your experience? And I'm gonna reiterate something, you tell me if I'm getting it right. So help growers navigate drought program and water rights system.
Yeah, reporting. Yeah.
Water rights reporting.
And recognition of rights, I think, is also implicit in his question.
Great,
Even though you're reducing your use, you still have the right to water.
Yeah.
Yeah, Maurice.
I would say on the technical side, and I know some of the local counties and parties do this, but having proficiency tests, like if we're in this program, not having it be a requirement, but say, hey, can we get our applicants to the front of the line to get these proficiency tests, to get these uniformity tests out in the field, so we know that our infrastructure is working to the best of its ability, and that helps save water a lot.
That's great. Where do we have the question, what other ideas for programs?
Right here.
That one? Great. So maybe like collaborating with groups who can help with pump efficiency tests. And I think there are some local resource conservation districts that do that, right? So partnering with RCDs to help growers with that.
Making sure the timing, making sure it's not interfering with normal farming practices, making sure it's before the season or maybe just after the season is concluded will help out a lot.
Okay. Great, and timing of those tests. We got 1 more minute.
I'm just volunteer here at UC Merced. From, I'm not sure if it's relevant to this project, but from the water economics perspective, maybe including some evaluation of crops, the results in crops, right, or operations in terms of yield and quality in the crops where those water conservation practices were applied. Would be interesting, I think, especially from farmers' perspective.
Okay, no, that's great. So other ideas for programs or projects would be evaluating yield and quality of crops. Are you suggesting that are enrolled in like a drought program where they're reducing irrigation? Okay.
Correct. Yeah, it could be the point to be as a study or program.
Yeah. And then maybe some sort of economic analysis that goes along with yield and quality.
Just anecdotally from the farmers, was there an impact on their yields?
Just anecdotally from the farmers, I'm curious if there was any impact on their yields.
I did a crop shift program where so it's hard to tell. I mean, I just grew a much lower value crop that was not irrigated. So, economically, sure, there's an impact. But that's what the payment was for, was to help replace that, so it worked out.
I may have seen some nodding heads about reduced yields too, though. So economic impacts either in the form of reduced yields or choosing a lower value crop.
I spoke with a farmer who used the funds to buy drought-tolerant corn seed, and he said that it was more expensive, but the yield was the same, and that it ended up being able to pay for itself with the less irrigation. And so he was like, I think I'll just do it going forward. So it made good economic sense. That was just one site visit I went on, but yeah. It looks like time's up.
Okay, good. All right, thank you all. I think these sticky notes are going to be posted for a while, so at the end of the meeting, if you want to circulate and just see if there's anything else you want to add, make sure any ideas that you offered are captured appropriately, feel free to do that. Thank you.
All right, we're coming to the end of our time together, so appreciate you all being here again. Jay and I are going to talk just a little bit about upcoming programs that might be of interest. So Jay, you want to go first?
Sure. I briefly talked about it at the top, and one of the methodologies that I think was most important to building confidence in OpenET indexed water use reporting in the Delta was my predecessor initiating a Delta measurement experimental consortium. And that is a group that continues to meet on a quarterly basis. And I want to just, again, kind of highlight, I'm really grateful for MBK's and Metropolitan's continued participation in a portfolio of experiments. Our objective is to really apply methodologies that help integrate a common understanding that gets us to a real-time perspective on actual consumptive use in the Delta. And obviously in those heavy irrigation months, looking at July through October, those are the months we're most interested in this process. And Cassandra, I think that really important again to slow down on looking at Flux Tower ET versus OpenET versus diversion metrics and to harmonize those as much as possible. And that's what we're really looking to do in that process. So my colleague, Amy Blunt, seated over here, is kind of I'm appointing her chief recruiter to really kind of map out our continued portfolio of experiments to really get us that deeper understanding of consumptive use across all water year types in the Delta. And so I just want to put a plug into that, and we'll be highlighting that again on the Delta Water Master website. But I'm really excited. We've got 2 new engineers coming on to really kind of marshal this program. So I just encourage all of you, it's not a big investment of time, but we are hyper interested in your perspectives on the ground here in the Delta and what you see and areas that we need to investigate. Our main aim is, how does water use correlate with water in the channels and water quality? And so how do we put that together in an informative way? So I'm excited that that forum, which is all volunteer, all comers, everybody welcome. There are people from NASA on the phone as well as JPL and Delta farmers, and I think it's just a really important collaboratory to better understand water use practices and consumptive use in the Delta. And again, I am really excited about the technology because I think that within a couple of years, it's going to take us to a point where we just have a real-time understanding of flow relationships to applied irrigation, and I think that's what we all want to see happen. So thank you all for really sharing your perspectives on this kind of a program, how we make it better, and how we learn from it, because I think that was really the important thing. And I just, to be really specific about it, and again, I'm kind of wearing 2 hats because I was a lobbyist for this effort for the Nature Conservancy, but I do want to thank Director Nema, Tom Gibson, Eric Lobashevsky in particular at DWR, who are really champions to put the funding into this program. And without their leadership, it wouldn't have happened, because I think it ended up being something that we've all really learned from. And just thank you all for participating actively and for your continued guidance and wisdom as we think through these issues together.
Great, thanks. Just a few words about other available programs. When are bird return bids due?
Yeah. The summer program already closed, so yeah, we're close. We should be opening stuff for the crane in about a month and a half.
Okay, great. Just wanted to put it in.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, it's still open. Bid for birds. Yeah, bid for birds is still open until the 19th, I believe.
20-something.
20-something. All right, I'm off.
Great. Just wanted to make sure you all are still aware of that. Also, shifting gears a little bit, although very similar, we ran a program last year to look at natural and working lands. How do we look at subsidence, reverse subsidence in the Delta? And we have basically expended all that money. But one of the grants that we put out was a large grant to the Nature Conservancy to work with small Delta farmers to consider converting to rice in the deeply subsided areas of the Delta. So that would stop subsidence, stop carbon emissions, and then also be typically a more lucrative commodity grown in the deeply subsided area of the Delta. So if you're interested in that program, please reach out to Nature Conservancy. We just executed that grant, and they're going to be looking for farmers for the next season. So great opportunity if that's something you're interested in.
I have a question.
Yes.
Does that just apply to rice? What about perennial crops like alfalfa? Where there's a cover crop?
Yeah, so the mechanism to really stop subsidence is putting water back on the landscape. So we're looking at, with that particular program, it would be rice cultivation because you can grow it in wet circumstances. But we also funded just managed wetlands. We've heard a lot of discussion about land that's too wet to farm. And you can actually allow wetlands to establish there, and you can get compensated for that as well. But anything that would be a dry agricultural crop like alfalfa would still maintain a dry soil column, which would continue the subsidence and carbon emissions. So the program was really focused on things that we can just put water back on the landscape. All right, so last then, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your time, all your contribution. It's just been a great exchange. We do have an exit interview that we'd very much appreciate you filling out. There's the forms and some pens and a little drop box. So if you want to do that, we greatly appreciate your feedback. Staff will be around for a few more minutes. If you have other ideas that you want to add to the flip charts, or if you want to chat with anybody else, we'll be here. So again, thank you so much for everything. It's been a great morning, and appreciate your feedback.
Thanks.